In this video today, we are going to talk about a variety of colored pencil techniques. These are going to be helpful for your current unit, but also for future artworks. I want you to pay attention carefully to these as we talk about them because colored pencils are one of those materials that students can tend to treat in a little bit more of a elementary way or treat them with a lack of respect or without the awareness that they are actually a really cool art medium and they can do some really cool things. So as you can see on this paper, I've practiced and tested out several different techniques. We'll go over most of these, but some of them you can practice and discover on your own. So to start, the first thing we are going to talk about is we're going to talk about different types of pressures, just like you would with an ebony pencil or a charcoal pencil or oil pastel or chalk pastel, any of those kinds of things. So we are going to start with our light pressure. And then we are going to do a heavy pressure. Actually, we'll do a medium pressure first, excuse me. So we'll do a medium pressure. And then we will do a heavy pressure. Now, when we get to the heavy pressure, there's going to be another term that we will talk about, but I'll explain that when we get there. So to make sure that this is easy for y'all to see, I'm just going to use my red. And whenever you do a light pressure, it is super similar to how you would do it with a ebony pencil or even an oil pastel. So you'll see on that light pressure, it's a nice, even stroke. Now, another thing that I want y'all to be aware of is as I'm working with this single color, I'm also keeping all of these strokes the same direction. Now, that doesn't have to be the case in every single technique that we do. There's some that you'll change those directions, but if you're working with light pressure, it's really important to maintain the consistent direction of those pencil strokes to make sure that it's nice, even, and looks a lot more professional and advanced. So as we get into our medium pressure, this will be just a little darker, nothing too crazy, so I'm not pushing down as hard as I can with the pencil, but you will notice that it holds a little bit of a darker value than this light pressure. One thing to notice too is you can still see the texture of the paper through these. So even though we're on the smooth side of our paper, there's still some texture to it, and you can see that through that pencil. Now, as you get into the heavy pressure, this is where you want to layer up your pencils and your layers of color, or you'll want to press down really hard. So as you layer these up, you will start to see that the color covers up that texture of the paper, and the color gets to be like really, really rich and saturated, which is a really intense color. Okay, so you'll notice, and if you ever feel it, so on these two I can still feel the paper texture, but on this one it feels a lot smoother. Be careful with this because you can do some really cool things with it, but it's also should be kind of like your last step when you're working with your pencils and things like that. So what I just did here, how I had a ton of pressure on this where it smoothed out the what's called the tooth or the texture of the paper, that is called burnishing. Okay, so burnishing is when you apply the heaviest pressure that you can do with colored pencil, that it creates this really saturated, bright, heavy color and a really, really smooth texture on your paper. This will come in handy with a couple other blending techniques that we'll talk about. So the next one that I'm going to show you guys is going to sound really familiar, and that is stippling. So you can do stippling, and we'll also talk about scumbling again. You can do those things with your pencils just like you would with pastels or with ebony or things like that. So stippling again is doing dots to create the illusion or to create your value. So if you remember, the closer the dots are together, the darker the value. The farther they are apart, the lighter the value. So with colored pencils, you can either do dots like I'm doing, or you can do like little circle dots like this. So actually use your hand to create those dots versus the pressure of just like hitting it on the paper. So just like I've done in the past, and just like you guys have probably seen before, I'm going to blend another color back in as I've gotten the value of the blue lighter. So I'm going to bring this yellow in, and remember again, the closer the dots are together, the darker the value, the lighter they are apart, the farther they are apart, the lighter the value. Okay, I'm gonna bring some of that blue right back in to this. Okay, so remember, you can get some really cool techniques and looks and textures with that. So that's a really fun one to remember and use. And the next one that I'm going to talk about is one that we haven't really mentioned before, but you might have heard this word before. It's called hatching. This is where you will do, or you will create your value with a series of lines. But the important thing to know about value, or about hatching, is that the lines are all going the same direction. So it's not quite as similar to light pressure, because you're not like creating it just by drawing them over and over. You are physically creating all of the strokes individually. So the closer they are together, the darker the value. The further they are apart, the lighter the value. This could be a really cool way to layer pencils or create an interesting texture. So I'm coming back in with this yellow. And notice that I am not holding my pencil onto the paper the whole time as I'm coloring that in, but I am actually picking it up and creating individual strokes. So hatching are those individual stroke lines. All right, so that's a really cool one to practice or work on. I'm gonna show y'all one more way that you can do that. An important thing to think about too is that you're gonna go from lights to dark. So just right under this, I'm gonna show you having yellow as my first layer. And then I'm going to bring in some red on top of it. So y'all can just kind of see what that might look like. And just like pastels, you can also bring your lightest color back in to blend those in more. But I'm going to still maintain that hatching quality and technique. So those are kind of cool. If you notice, it creates an interesting texture and some visual blending happening. So the next one that I'm going to talk about is similar to hatching, but it's called cross hatching. And based on that name, you can probably guess that it is the same idea, except you create lines that crisscross. So I'll start with the yellow. I know it's a little bit harder to see, but it's like making a bunch of like plus signs or X's. So either way you want to go about it. You can also do a bunch of hatching and then go back in and cross hatch like that. So if you can see, I know that's pretty light, but how I did it was I created a bunch of X's to do one of the cross hatching approaches. Or you can come back in with your hatching and then literally do another direction of hatching to create that cross hatching look. Okay, that's also good to do blending and layering and things like that. Show you with the blue again. Okay, so the next one that I want to talk about is scumbling. As you guys have heard that word before, it should be pretty familiar. So scumbling is basically the fancy word for scribbling. So I'm going to start with a red on this one, and then I will show you how to blend with that. So again, scumbling, you can do like little scribbles like this, or you can just do a bunch of C-shaped marks, whichever way you want to approach it. And the closer they are together, the darker the value. The farther they are apart, the lighter the value. So that can create some interesting textures or looks. Okay, one that I want to show you right now is called layering. This one you need to be kind of careful about because you'll have to figure out a way to combine light pressure, medium pressure, or heavy pressure / burnishing together to make that work for you. So I'm going to do that one right under here. So layering, I'll show you the light layering, and then I'll show you like a darker layering too. So if I have my yellow to start, these are very similar to pastels. You'll want to start, like I've said before, with the lightest value. Notice I'm keeping it consistent and I'm going all the same direction. Now I'm gonna bring this blue back in. So you can either go the same direction with that color, or you can bring it back in an opposite direction. Now, when it comes to blending these, you have a couple choices. You could come back in again with your lightest value, and you'll start to see some of that blending in the middle, how I'm getting that green look, that green color. And you'll want to kind of work with it and create that even transition as best as you can. Or you can also be careful about this because sometimes it can desaturate your colors, but you can also bring your white back in and blend on top of that and use those to blend. So this is a lighter layer. I'm gonna show you guys how to do a darker layer and how you can pull in some of that burnishing effect. So I'll start with my yellow again. And I'm gonna create a pretty heavy pressure layer with that yellow. And then I'm going to do this one with red. So I'll start from here and I'm going to create that layer of heavy pressure. And then you will start to see that kind of blend together. And I'll bring that yellow back in. And just like pastels, this will take a lot of layers, lots of switching your colors back and forth, and a lot of small detail work. So if you'll notice right there, what I did on this area right here is I brought my red in and I did a light pressure on top of the heavy pressure, and that allowed me to be able to blend some of that yellow in there really nice and neat. So this is a, so these are both layering. This one is a light pressure layer. And then this one is a heavy pressure layer. But if you'll notice right here, I also pulled in some lighter pressure. So it also has with light pressure on top of it. The very last thing that I want to show you guys before this is done is I want to show you how to create a shade, how to bring that black in. So it's going to be a very similar approach to what we've done in the past, or how you would create other stuff as well. So a shade, if you remember, is where you add black to a hue. So I will start with this red, and I don't want to get a super heavy, like burnished layer just yet. But I'll start with my red, and then the same thing. I'm going to bring in my black, and I'm going to work in really light layers. Because just like every other medium, a black in any approach can overtake your color very quickly, and it's impossible to remove it. So then I'm going to come back in and kind of do some burnishing on top of that first layer of black. Okay. So there's my nice shade. Now a tint is a little bit harder to get, but I'm still going to show you that and how you can bring the white in to layer some of that stuff up. So I'm going to start with my red again with a light layer, light pressure layer. And I'm going to slowly lift up the pressure to create that value scale like we've done in the past. So layer it back in. And obviously the white of my paper is white, but if I bring my white pencil back over it, it'll start to kind of blend in some of those colors and help show that look on there. Awesome. So that is just a quick tutorial with some of those colored pencil techniques. You can do a lot of different cool things with this stuff. My personal favorite is this heavy pressure blending with the light pressure added on top of it. Forgot my E. With the light pressure added on top of it. And you can do that with all different colors, all different things like that. Remember to break down your colors, work in layers, and work from lights to darks.